The floorboards in our old Maine house had a language all their own, and tonight they were telling me secrets I didn't want to hear. 3:17 in the morning, and my wife Isla was tiptoeing down the hallway like a teenager sneaking past her parents. I lay there in our bed, eyes closed, listening to her bare feet whisper across the hardwood as she made her way to the kitchen. 15 years of marriage teaches you things. The sound of someone trying not to make noise, the particular creak of the third step when someone's being careful, the soft click of a door closing just a hair too gently. I'd been awake for 2 hours already, staring at the ceiling and counting the reasons my life had turned into something I barely recognized. Wes Farrow, 40 years old, custom woodworker, husband to a woman who hadn't touched me in 6 months, and father to kids who'd grown up and moved away, to lives that didn't include weekend visits home. The murmur of Isla's voice drifted up through the heating vents. She was talking to someone, her tone light and musical in a way I hadn't heard in years. There was laughter in that voice, genuine warmth that made my chest tighten with something between longing and rage. I slipped out of bed and padded to the top of the stairs, my own feet finding the quiet spots I'd memorized over the years. The house was dark, except for the pale glow coming from the kitchen, and Isla's voice carried clearly in the still air. "I can't wait either," she was saying, and there was something in those words that made my hands clench into fists. Tomorrow feels like forever away. A pause, then that laugh again, rich and throaty, and completely unlike the tired sighs I'd been getting for months. "You're terrible," she whispered, but she said it like it was the best thing in the world. "What if someone hears you?" I crept down 3 steps, then 4, until I could see her silhouette in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing the red nightgown I'd bought her for Christmas, the one she'd thanked me for and then never worn. Her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and she was twisting a strand around her finger the way she used to do when we were dating. I love it when you talk like that," she said, and my stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a cliff. The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, full of whispered promises and plans I wasn't part of. When she finally hung up and started back toward the stairs, I was already in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady and deep, like a man lost in innocent dreams. She slipped under the covers beside me, and for a moment I thought she might reach out, might remember that she had a husband lying right there. Instead, she turned away and settled into sleep with a contented sigh that cut through me like a blade. Morning came gray and cold, typical for October in Maine. I was already up, coffee brewing, when Isla wandered into the kitchen wearing her work clothes and the expression she reserved for necessary but unpleasant conversations. "We need to talk," she said, not bothering with good morning or any of the small courtesies that used to cushion our interactions. I looked up from my newspaper, taking in her perfectly applied makeup and the way she'd styled her hair with extra care. "About what?" "About us. About this." She gestured vaguely at the space between us, as if our marriage was something she could wave away. "This isn't working anymore, Wes." "Define this." She sighed, the sound heavy with practiced patience. "Don't be dense. You know what I'm talking about. We're like roommates. Worse than roommates. At least roommates pretend to like each other." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you." Her voice hardened, taking on the tone she used with difficult clients at the insurance office. "I'm not sleeping with you anymore. I'm not pretending everything's fine anymore. I need space to figure out what I want." The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the old clock on the wall and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I studied her face, noting the flush in her cheeks and the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Okay," I said. She blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. "Okay? You want space? You've got it. You don't want to share a bed? That's fine. I'll take the guest room." I picked up my newspaper and turned the page with exaggerated calm. "Anything else?" Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'm staying at Serena's tonight," she called over her shoulder. "Don't wait up. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows, and I was alone with the silence and the bitter taste of my coffee and the growing certainty that my wife was lying to me about more than just needing space. I spent the morning in my workshop, a converted mill building down by the river that I'd bought and renovated when the kids were small and Isla still believed in my dreams. The familiar smell of sawdust and wood stain usually calmed me, but today my hands shook as I tried to focus on the cabinet doors I was crafting for a client in Portland. By noon, I'd given up pretending to work and was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of the Crooked Antler, the bar where half the town came to drink and the other half came to gossip. Big Dave Morrison had owned the place for 20 years, and he had a memory like a steel trap when it came to who was doing what with whom. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Dave said when I walked in, his massive frame filling the space behind the bar like a friendly mountain. "Worse," I said, settling onto my usual stool. "Woman trouble." Dave poured me a beer without being asked, his weathered face creasing into a sympathetic frown. "Isla, is there anyone in this town who doesn't know my business?" "Probably not." He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were the only ones in the place. "You want to talk about it?" I took a long pull of my beer, weighing my words. Dave was a good friend, but he was also the town's unofficial information exchange. Anything I told him would be common knowledge by dinner time. "She wants space," I said finally. Dave snorted. "Space. That's what my ex-wife said right before she ran off with her yoga instructor." He studied my face with the intensity of a man who'd seen his share of marital disasters. "You think there's someone else?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I wanted to deny it, to defend my wife's honor and pretend that 15 years of marriage meant something. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Yeah," I said. "I think there is." Dave's expression darkened. "You know who?" "Not yet, but I'm going to find out." I left the bar with a head full of beer and a heart full of purpose. The afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made you remember why people stayed in Maine despite the long winters and short summers. I drove home slowly, taking the long way past the lake where Isla and I used to go when we were young and stupid and in love. The house felt different when I walked in, like it was holding its breath. I went straight to our bedroom and started looking, not sure what I was searching for, but certain I'd know it when I found it. It took me 20 minutes to discover the phone. She'd hidden it in the bottom of her lingerie drawer, wrapped in a silk scarf I'd never seen before. A cheap prepaid phone, the kind people bought when they didn't want their conversations traced back to them. The kind people bought when they were planning things they didn't want their spouses to know about. My hands were steady as I powered it on, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The phone buzzed to life, and I found myself staring at a screen full of text messages that made everything crystal clear. The contact was listed simply as LB, and the conversation history painted a picture I'd been trying not to see for months. Explicit messages that made my face burn. Photos that left nothing to imagination. Plans for weekend getaways and afternoon meetings at a lakeside cabin I'd never heard of. The most recent exchange was from this morning, sent while I was in my workshop trying to pretend my world wasn't falling apart. "LB, can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible." "Isla, you're not so bad yourself. Same time tomorrow?" "LB, wouldn't miss it. Wear that red thing again." I set the phone down on the dresser and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Isla and I had planted our first garden 20 years ago. The flower beds were overgrown now, choked with weeds and neglect, but I could still remember the way she'd laughed when I'd accidentally planted the tomatoes upside down. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face and sleep beside me and plan her betrayal with the casual efficiency of someone scheduling a dentist appointment. I picked up the phone again and scrolled through more messages, my anger crystallizing into something cold and sharp and infinitely more dangerous than rage. There were dozens of them, going back months. References to places they had been, things they had done, promises they had made to each other, and threaded through it all, casual mentions of me. "Wes is working late again. He doesn't suspect anything. He's so clueless." That last one hit me like a physical blow, not because it hurt, but because it was so completely wrong. I wasn't clueless. I was a craftsman, someone who paid attention to details and took pride in getting things exactly right. I'd built a business on precision and patience, on measuring twice and cutting once. And now I was going to apply those same skills to taking apart the life my wife had built on lies. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to make myself a sandwich. While I ate, I made a list in my head of everything I needed to do. The legal stuff first, protecting my assets, documenting her infidelity, making sure she couldn't clean me out while I was busy being the grieving husband. Then the fun part. Finding out who LB was and exactly how long this had been going on, learning everything I could about their relationship and their plans and their weaknesses, and finally, the reckoning. The moment when Isla would realize that her clueless husband had been paying attention all along and that her carefully constructed double life was about to come crashing down around her ears. I finished my sandwich and walked back to my workshop, whistling softly under my breath. For the first time in months, I had a project that really interested me. The next morning brought the kind of cold snap that reminded you winter was lurking just around the corner. I was up before dawn, coffee brewing and laptop open on the kitchen table, diving into the tedious but necessary work of protecting myself from the financial hurricane that was coming. 20 years in business had taught me the value of good records and better lawyers. By 7 a.m., I'd sent encrypted emails to my accountant and attorney, laying out the situation in clinical terms that made my wife's betrayal sound like a business problem to be solved rather than a personal catastrophe to be endured. Isla wandered down at 8, looking rumpled and guilty in yesterday's clothes. She'd clearly spent the night somewhere other than Serena's couch, but she met my eyes with the practiced innocence of someone who'd been lying for so long she'd started to believe her own stories. "Coffee?" I asked, holding up the pot like a good husband. "I can get it myself," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. She'd been braced for accusations and anger, not domestic normalcy. "Suit yourself." I went back to my laptop, fingers clicking across the keys as I transferred funds from our joint accounts into ones she couldn't access. Legal, documented, and completely within my rights, as long as I could prove she was planning to abandon the marriage. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering over my shoulder with the casual nosiness of someone who still thought she had the right to know my business. "Client stuff. The Henderson kitchen is turning into a nightmare." The lie came easily, seasoned with just enough truth to be believable. The Hendersons were indeed being difficult, though not in any way that required pre-dawn laptop sessions. She nodded and retreated to the other side of the kitchen, pouring her coffee and checking her phone with the furtive intensity of someone expecting important messages. I watched her face in the reflection of my laptop screen, noting the way her expression softened when she read something that made her smile. "I'll be late tonight," she said without looking up from her phone. "Serena's having a crisis with the PTA fundraiser. You know how she gets." I made a non-committal sound and kept typing. "Don't wait up for me either. I've got a big delivery tomorrow and I want to get the finish work done tonight." It was her turn to nod absently, already mentally somewhere else. She gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing only to call back a distracted goodbye that felt more like an afterthought than a farewell. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I was on the phone to Nate Kowalski, my apprentice and the closest thing I had to a son since my own kids had grown up and moved away. Nate was 28, whip-smart, and blessed with the kind of technical skills that made him invaluable in a world where everything was connected to everything else. "Boss?" His voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "It's not even 9 o'clock. "I need a favor," I said, "the kind that requires your special talents." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, he was fully awake. "What kind of special talents are we talking about?" "The kind that involve phones and computers and things that people think are private." Another pause, longer this time. Nate was a good kid, but he wasn't naive. He knew exactly what I was asking for and why I might need it. "When do you want to meet?" he asked finally. "Now. My place. And Nate, bring your toolkit." He arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he'd gotten dressed in the dark, but carrying a messenger bag that I knew contained enough electronic wizardry to hack into Fort Knox. We sat at my kitchen table like two conspirators planning a heist, which wasn't far from the truth. "So," he said, pulling a tablet and several small devices from his bag, "want to tell me what's going on?" I gave him the abbreviated version, watching his face cycle through surprise, anger, and finally a cold determination that reminded me why I'd always liked the kid. He didn't waste time with sympathy or useless questions. Instead, he started laying out equipment on the table like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. "First things first," he said. "We need to clone her phone. Get me 5 minutes alone with it and I can mirror everything. Calls, texts, emails, location data. She'll never know we're watching." "That might be tricky. She keeps it with her." "What about the burner phone?" I blinked. "How did you know about that?" He grinned, the expression making him look even younger than his 28 years. "Boss, I've been working for you for 5 years. You think I don't know the difference between regular marital problems and espionage-level stuff? Nobody asks for my special talents because their wife is working late." "Fair point." I retrieved the phone from its hiding place and handed it over, watching as Nate's fingers flew over his tablet, connecting cables and running programs that meant nothing to me but everything to him. "This is interesting," he murmured after a few minutes. "The phone's registered to a Serena Walsh. Your wife's friend?" "That's impossible. I found it in Isla's drawer." "I'm just telling you what the registration says. Could be she borrowed it, could be they're sharing it, could be Serena bought it for her." He looked up from his work, eyes serious. "Or could be there's more going on here than just an affair." The implications hit me like a truck. If Serena was involved, it meant this wasn't just about Isla stepping out on our marriage. It meant there was planning involved, coordination, maybe even conspiracy. "Can you trace the other number? This LB person? Already on it. His fingers danced across the screen. Liam Bell, registered address on Lakeshore Drive. Runs a landscaping business called Bell's Outdoor Services. Divorced, 2 kids, currently 3 months behind on his truck payments. I sat back in my chair, pieces clicking into place. Liam Bell. I knew the name, had probably seen his truck around town with its faded logo and optimistic slogan about making your yard beautiful. A small-time operator trying to make it in a business where half the competition came from teenagers with lawnmowers and the other half from established companies with real equipment. What else can you find out about him? Give me an hour and I'll know his shoe size. Nate was already deep in his electronic rabbit hole, pulling up social media profiles and business records and public documents that painted a picture of a man whose life was held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. I left him to his work and drove to the workshop, needing the familiar comfort of wood and tools and projects that made sense. But even surrounded by the evidence of my skill and success, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The answer came to me while I was sanding a cabinet door, the repetitive motion freeing my mind to wander. Serena Walsh had been Isla's best friend since college, the kind of relationship that survived marriages and divorces and cross-country moves. They talked every day, shared every secret, knew each other's lives inside and out. If Serena was helping Isla have an affair, it wasn't just friendship. It was something deeper, more personal. Maybe revenge for some old slight, or jealousy that had been festering for years, or simple boredom with her own life that made destroying mine seem like entertainment. My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. Got everything you need? Meet me at the Antler at 6. You're buying. I spent the afternoon making plans, the kind of detailed, methodical preparation that had made me successful in business and would hopefully make me successful in war. Because that's what this was, I realized. Not a marriage falling apart, or a midlife crisis, or any of the other euphemisms people use to avoid facing ugly truths. This was war, and I'd been fighting it alone while my enemies coordinated their attacks and shared intelligence and planned their victory celebration. But not anymore. The Crooked Antler was busier at 6, filled with the after-work crowd looking to wash away their day with beer and conversation. Nate had claimed a corner booth and was nursing a soda, his laptop open and his expression grim. You're not going to like this, he said without preamble. Tell me. He turned the screen toward me, showing a series of photos that made my stomach clench. Isla and Liam at various locations around town, sometimes alone, sometimes with other people I recognized. The images were time-stamped, going back almost 6 months. Serena's been documenting everything, Nate explained. Photos, videos, even audio recordings of their conversations. It's like she's building a case file. For what? That's the question, isn't it? He clicked to another folder, this one full of financial documents and legal papers. Look at this. Liam's business is tanking. He's behind on everything, rent, equipment payments, insurance. But 3 months ago, he suddenly got a cash infusion. Guess where it came from? I didn't have to guess. The bank statements were right there, showing transfers from an account I recognized as one of Isla's personal ones. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, all carefully spaced to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements. She's been funding his business? More than that. She's been funding his life. Truck payments, rent, even his kids' school fees. This isn't just an affair, boss. This is a full-scale financial partnership. The room seemed to tilt around me as the implications sank in. Isla wasn't just cheating on me emotionally and physically. She was cheating on me financially, using our money to support her lover's failing business and lifestyle. There's more, Nate said quietly. I found emails between Serena and Isla going back 2 years. They've been planning this for a long time. The affair, the financial stuff, even the divorce. He showed me message after message, a paper trail of betrayal that was breathtaking in its scope and detail. Serena advising Isla on how to hide assets, how to document my supposed shortcomings as a husband, how to position herself for the best possible settlement when she finally pulled the trigger. They think you're an idiot, Nate said bluntly. The emails are full of jokes about how clueless you are, how easy it's going to be to take you for everything you're worth. I stared at the screen, reading my wife's words about me, seeing myself through her eyes as a pathetic figure too stupid to notice what was happening in his own house. The anger that had been simmering in my chest for days suddenly crystallized into something cold and sharp and infinitely more dangerous. What do you need me to do? Nate asked. I looked up at him, this kid who'd become more loyal to me than my own wife, and smiled for the first time in weeks. I need you to help me show them exactly how clueless I am. The grocery store parking lot on a Saturday morning was like a small-town theater where everyone played their roles with practiced ease: soccer moms loading minivans, retirees comparing coupon strategies, teenagers pretending they were too cool to be seen helping their parents. It was the perfect place for what I had in mind. I'd been watching Isla's patterns for 2 weeks now, thanks to Nate's electronic surveillance and my own careful observations. She met Serena every Saturday at 10:30, ostensibly to plan their various community activities, but really to coordinate their deception. They thought they were being clever, meeting in public where no one would suspect anything underhanded. They were wrong. I parked 3 spaces away from Serena's silver SUV and waited, sipping coffee from a thermos and reading a woodworking magazine like a man with nothing more pressing on his mind than joinery techniques. The October air was crisp enough to fog my breath, and the parking lot was busy enough to provide perfect cover for what I was about to do. Isla arrived first, pulling up in the Honda we'd bought together 5 years ago when she'd gotten her promotion at the insurance office. She looked good, I had to admit, hairstyled, makeup perfect, wearing the kind of casual but expensive outfit that suggested someone who had both money and taste, someone who certainly didn't look like she was planning to destroy her husband's life. Serena arrived 5 minutes later, her entrance more dramatic. She drove like she did everything else, fast, aggressive, and with complete confidence that the world would get out of her way. She was attractive in the way that required constant maintenance, all highlights and personal training and cosmetic procedures that she claimed were just a little freshening up. I watched them greet each other with the kind of elaborate hug that suggested they hadn't seen each other in weeks rather than days, then disappear into the store together. Time to move. The device Nate had given me was about the size of a quarter and magnetic enough to stick to anything metal. It took me 30 seconds to attach it to the undercarriage of Serena's SUV, hidden among the brake lines and exhaust pipes where no one would ever think to look. GPS tracking with a battery life of 6 months and a range that would let me follow her anywhere in the state. I was back in my truck, magazine open and expression innocent, when they emerged 20 minutes later with a single bag between them. Not exactly a major shopping expedition, which confirmed what I'd suspected. These meetings weren't about groceries any more than they were about PTA fundraisers. They stood between their cars, talking, close enough that I could see their expressions, but too far away to hear their words. Isla looked nervous, glancing around the parking lot like she expected to see surveillance cameras or private investigators. Serena was animated, gesturing with her hands and talking fast in the way that suggested she was trying to convince Isla of something. Finally, they hugged again and went their separate ways. Isla headed home, probably to spend the afternoon pretending to be a devoted wife. Serena went north, toward the Lake District where property was expensive and secrets were easy to keep. I followed at a distance, letting the GPS tracker do most of the work while I stayed far enough back to avoid detection. She drove for 20 minutes through increasingly rural roads before turning into a gravel driveway that led to a small cabin nestled among pine trees and overlooking the dark water of Moose Pond. I parked on the main road and walked through the woods, grateful for the hunting skills my father had taught me 30 years ago. The cabin was rustic but well-maintained, the kind of place that cost more than it looked like it should. Through the windows, I could see Serena moving around inside, and after a few minutes, she was joined by someone else. Liam Bell looked exactly like his driver's license photo. Mid-30s, athletic build going soft around the edges, the kind of guy who'd probably been popular in high school and was still trying to coast on those long-ago victories. He greeted Serena with a familiarity that suggested this wasn't their first meeting, and they settled at a table where papers were spread out like they were planning a business deal, or a war. I took photos with the telephoto lens Nate had insisted I'd need, capturing images of their meeting and the documents they were reviewing. When they moved to the couch and their conversation became more intimate, I got those pictures too. Insurance, Nate called it. Evidence that would be useful when the time came to reveal exactly how deep this conspiracy went. They spent 2 hours at the cabin before Liam left, driving away in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. Serena stayed another 30 minutes, making phone calls and pacing around the small space like a general planning a campaign. When she finally left, I was already back at my truck, ready to follow her to whatever came next. She drove straight to Isla's office. The Hartwell Insurance Agency occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all gingerbread trim and historical markers that made it look more like a museum than a place of business. I parked across the street and watched through the front windows as Serena marched up to Isla's desk and launched into what looked like an urgent conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. "Audio feed is live. Put in your earpiece." I'd forgotten about the listening device he'd planted in Isla's office during a fake service call the week before. The technology was impressive enough to pick up conversations from 50 feet away and transmit them to my phone in real time. "Can't keep stalling," Serena was saying, her voice tight with frustration. He's going to figure it out eventually. He's not that smart, Isla replied, but she sounded less certain than she had in her text messages. Wes lives in his own little world. As long as his workshop is running and his projects are on schedule, he doesn't pay attention to anything else. That's what you said 6 months ago, and look where we are now. Liam's getting impatient, the money situation is getting complicated, and you're still playing house with your husband like nothing's changed. I need more time. Time for what? You've already got everything in place. The financial records, the evidence of his neglect, even testimony from people who'll swear he's been emotionally absent for years. What are you waiting for? There was a long pause before Isla answered, and when she did, her voice was small and uncertain. I guess I'm scared. Of what? He's not going to fight you. He's not even going to see it coming. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be over, and you'll be free to start your new life with Liam. And if he does fight? Serena's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. Then we use the nuclear option. The photos, the recordings, the evidence of his drinking problem and his anger issues. We destroy his reputation so completely that no judge in the state will give him anything more than supervised visitation with his workshop tools. My hands clenched around the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles white. Drinking problem? Anger issues? I barely touched alcohol except for the occasional beer, and I'd never raised my voice to Isla in 15 years of marriage, much less my hand. But that didn't matter, did it? In a divorce court, perception was reality, and if they had manufactured evidence to support their lies, the truth would be irrelevant. When? Isla asked. Soon. Liam's situation is getting desperate, and we can't keep propping him up indefinitely. The longer we wait, the more chance there is that something will go wrong. Next month? Next week would be better. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering logistics and timing and contingency plans that demonstrated a level of preparation that was both impressive and terrifying. They'd thought of everything, from which lawyer Isla should hire to where she should stay during the divorce proceedings, to how they'd handle the media if the story attracted attention. They'd thought of everything except the possibility that their clueless target might be listening to every word. When Serena finally left the office, I was ready for her. I followed her to the coffee shop where she met with Patricia Henley, the president of the PTA and Isla's biggest rival in the competitive world of small-town social politics. Their conversation was brief but animated, with Patricia taking notes and nodding enthusiastically at whatever Serena was telling her. More conspiracy, more coordination. How many people were involved in this plot against me? How long had they been planning and preparing and positioning themselves for the moment when they'd strike? I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with the scope of what I'd discovered. This wasn't just an affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my life, orchestrated by people I'd trusted and supported and considered friends. But they'd made one crucial mistake in all their planning and preparation. They'd underestimated me. That evening, I sat in my workshop with Nate, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented 20 years of building something worthwhile. The familiar smells of wood and stain couldn't calm me tonight, but they reminded me of who I was and what I was capable of when I set my mind to something. So what's the plan? Nate asked, his laptop open and ready. I looked around at the workshop, at the evidence of skill and patience and attention to detail that had made me successful in business and respected in the community. Then I looked at the photos and documents and recordings that proved my wife and her friends thought I was a fool. We're going to show them exactly how foolish I can be, I said. But first, we're going to make sure they have front row seats for the show. The Autumn Festival was Millbrook's biggest event of the year, a weekend-long celebration that transformed our sleepy town into something resembling a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Main Street closed to traffic. Vendors set up booths selling everything from hand-carved furniture to maple syrup, and the entire population turned out to eat fried dough and pretend we were still living in simpler times. It was also the perfect venue for what I had planned. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing, with Nate's help turning my workshop into mission control for an operation that would have impressed the Pentagon. We had surveillance equipment monitoring Isla's every move, financial records documenting her theft of our joint assets, and enough recorded conversations to fill a small library. But the centerpiece of our preparation was the video. Nate had outdone himself, combining footage from the cabin with audio from the office meetings and financial records that told the complete story of my wife's betrayal. It was edited with professional skill, complete with timestamps and captions that made everything crystal clear even to the most casual observer. You sure about this? Nate asked as we loaded the projection equipment into his van. Once you do this, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said, and I was. The time for subtlety and private confrontations had passed. Isla wanted to destroy my reputation with lies and manufactured evidence? Fine. I'd destroy hers with the truth. The festival was in full swing when we arrived, the streets packed with families and couples and groups of teenagers trying to look bored while secretly enjoying themselves. I spotted Isla almost immediately, holding court near the PTA booth with Serena and Patricia Henley and half a dozen other women who formed the unofficial power structure of our town's social scene. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, and she dressed for the weather in a way that suggested both practicality and style. She was laughing at something Serena had said, her face animated in a way I hadn't seen in months when she was talking to me. "There's our target," Nate murmured, nodding toward the large white screen that had been set up for the evening's outdoor movie showing. "You want to wait until dark?" "No," I said. "I want everyone to see this clearly." We set up the projector behind the bandstand, hidden among the sound equipment and cables that no one would think to question. The beauty of small-town events was that everyone assumed everyone else belonged, and a couple of guys with technical equipment were practically invisible. By 4 o'clock, we were ready. I walked through the festival crowd, nodding to neighbors and clients and people I'd known for 20 years. They smiled and waved and made small talk about the weather and the upcoming election and whether the Patriots had a chance this season. Normal people living normal lives, with no idea that they were about to witness the destruction of everything they thought they knew about Wes and Isla Farrow. "Wes," Isla's voice carried over the crowd, bright and cheerful and completely false. "I didn't expect to see you here." She was walking toward me with Serena at her side, both of them wearing the kind of forced smiles that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. Behind them, Patricia Henley watched with the avid interest of someone who sensed drama in the air. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, matching her fake enthusiasm with my own. "Beautiful day for a festival." "It really is." She glanced around nervously, like she was looking for escape routes. "How's the workshop? Staying busy?" "Oh, you know how it is. Always working on something." I smiled at Serena, who was trying to blend into the background. "Hello, Serena. How's the cabin?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white, then red, and she shot a panicked look at Isla that told me everything I needed to know about their state of mind. "Cabin?" Isla asked, her voice carefully neutral. "The one on Moose Pond. Serena was there last weekend, weren't you? With Liam Bell?" The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the festival continued, children laughing, vendors calling out their wares, a bluegrass band tuning up on the main stage. But in our little circle, time seemed to have stopped. "I don't know what you're talking about," Serena said finally, but her voice was shaky and unconvincing. "Sure you do. Nice place. Great view of the water. Perfect for private meetings." Isla grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my jacket hard enough to leave marks. "Wes, what's gotten into you? You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just imagining things." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen, where a photo of Serena and Liam at the cabin was displayed in high-definition clarity. "Maybe I'm imagining this too." Serena made a sound like a wounded animal and stumbled backward into Patricia, who caught her with the practiced ease of someone used to dealing with dramatic women. Isla's grip on my arm tightened, and when she spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I put the phone away and smiled at the growing crowd of onlookers who were pretending not to eavesdrop on our conversation. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "We need to talk," Isla said through gritted teeth. "Privately." "Oh, I think we're past the point of private conversations, don't you?" I looked around at the festival crowd, noting how many familiar faces were turned in our direction. "After all, you've been sharing our private business with Serena and Liam and who knows who else for months. Why start being discreet now?" That's when Nate's signal came through, a text message that simply said, "Ready." "Actually," I said, raising my voice so it carried over the crowd noise, "I think everyone should hear this." The projection screen flickered to life, and suddenly my wife's face was 20 feet tall and clearly visible to everyone at the festival. The audio was crystal clear, her voice carrying across the crowd as she talked about her plans to leave me, her relationship with Liam, and the financial arrangements she'd made to support him. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in gasps and whispers as people recognized the voices and faces on the screen. Children were quickly hustled away by embarrassed parents, while adults crowded closer to get a better view of the drama unfolding before them. Isla stood frozen beside me, watching her secrets play out in front of half the town. Her face cycled through shock, horror, and finally a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. "You bastard," she whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden quiet. Now, I said mildly. "Let's not make a scene. People are watching." That's when she snapped. The slap came fast and hard, her palm connecting with my cheek with a crack that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The crowd gasped collectively, and I heard someone's phone camera clicking as they captured the moment for posterity. I touched my cheek, feeling the sting and the warmth that would probably turn into a bruise by tomorrow. Then I smiled. "Feel better?" I asked. She drew back for another swing, but this time I was ready. I caught her wrist gently but firmly, holding her in place while she struggled against my grip. "I wouldn't," I said quietly. "You're already the star of the show. Don't make it worse." On the screen behind us, the video had moved on to financial records showing the money transfers to Liam's accounts. Bank statements, canceled checks, and wire transfer receipts that documented months of systematic theft from our joint assets. The crowd was getting restless now, with some people calling out questions and others trying to get closer to the screen for a better view. I could see Sheriff Morrison pushing through the crowd, his face grim as he approached our little drama. "That's enough," he said when he reached us, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in law enforcement. "Turn off the projector." "Almost finished," I said, not moving from my position, just getting to the good part. The final segment of the video was Serena's voice, recorded during her meeting with Isla at the office. Her plans to destroy my reputation, her casual discussion of manufactured evidence, her confidence that they could manipulate the legal system to their advantage. When it was over, the silence was complete. Even the children had stopped running around, sensing the adult tension that hung over the festival like a storm cloud. "Well," I said finally, releasing Isla's wrist and stepping back. "I guess the cat's out of the bag." Sheriff Morrison looked from me to Isla to the screen where the final image was frozen, a photo of her and Liam in an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "Folks need to move along," he announced to the crowd. "Show's over." But it wasn't over, not really. As people slowly dispersed, I could hear the whispers and see the pointing fingers and watch the way former friends turned their backs on Isla and Serena. In a town the size of Millbrook, reputation was everything, and theirs were now in ruins. "You've destroyed everything," Isla said, her voice hollow with shock. "No," I corrected her. "I've just revealed what you already destroyed. There's a difference." She looked around at the dispersing crowd, at the friends who wouldn't meet her eyes, at the neighbors who were already pulling out their phones to spread the news to anyone who hadn't been at the festival. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. "I wasn't asking for forgiveness," I replied. "I was asking for honesty. Since you couldn't provide that, I had to provide it myself." Sheriff Morrison approached us again, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes sympathetic. "Wes, you need to come with me. We need to talk about how you obtained some of that evidence." I nodded, having expected this moment. "Of course, Sheriff. Just let me clean up my equipment first." As Nate and I packed up the projector, I could see Isla standing alone near the PTA booth, abandoned by the friends who had encouraged her betrayal and facing a future that looked very different from the one she'd planned. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that had once been beautiful and was now irretrievably broken. But sometimes, breaking things was the only way to clear space for something better to grow. The sheriff's office smelled like coffee and disappointment, a combination that seemed appropriate for the conversation I was about to have. Tom Morrison had been keeping the peace in Millbrook for longer than I'd been married, and his weathered face showed every year of dealing with domestic disputes, petty crimes, and the occasional drama that erupted when small-town secrets came to light. "That was quite a show you put on," he said, settling behind his desk with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been brewing since morning. "Want to tell me how you came by all that evidence?" I'd prepared for this moment, knowing that my methods hadn't exactly followed the rules of legal procedure. Some of it was in plain sight. The financial records are from accounts I have legal access to. The photos were taken in public places or through windows that weren't covered. And the recordings? Audio from conversations that took place in locations where privacy couldn't be reasonably expected. It was technically true, if you ignored the electronic surveillance equipment that had made it possible. Tom studied me over his coffee cup, his eyes sharp despite his casual demeanor. "You know I have to ask, did you break any laws obtaining this information?" "I didn't break into anyone's property. I didn't steal anything that wasn't already mine. I didn't threaten or coerce anyone." Each statement was carefully worded to be technically accurate while avoiding the more complicated questions about electronic surveillance and privacy rights. "What about the boy? Nate?" "He helped me with some technical aspects, nothing illegal." Tom was quiet for a long moment, weighing my words against what he knew about me and the situation. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Wes, I've known you for 20 years. You're not a troublemaker, you pay your taxes, and you've never given me a moment's worry. But what you did today?" He shook his head. That was public humiliation on a scale that this town hasn't seen since the Reverend Patterson got caught with the choir director. My wife was stealing from our joint accounts to support her lover. She was planning to divorce me using manufactured evidence of abuse and alcoholism. She was conspiring with her friends to destroy my reputation and take everything I've worked for. My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger underneath it like a banked fire. What exactly should I have done? Asked her nicely to stop. You should have come to me, or hired a lawyer, or handled it through proper channels. The proper channels would have taken months, maybe years. Meanwhile, she would have continued stealing from me and building her case against me. Sometimes the proper channels aren't fast enough. Tom nodded slowly, understanding the logic, even if he didn't approve of the methods. What happens now? Now she knows that I know, and everyone else knows too. The rest is up to her. And if she retaliates? I met his eyes steadily. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. He walked me out an hour later, after extracting promises that I wouldn't engage in any more public spectacles and would handle future developments through legal channels. I agreed readily enough, knowing that the public phase of my campaign was over anyway. The real work was just beginning. I drove home through streets that felt different somehow, like the festival revelation had shifted the fundamental nature of the town. People I passed looked at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity to outright approval. Word traveled fast in Millbrook, and by now everyone knew the story of Wes Farrow's revenge. The house was empty when I arrived, which didn't surprise me. Isla's car was gone, along with several suitcases and most of her personal belongings. She'd moved fast, probably to Serena's place or maybe to the cabin where this whole mess had started. My phone was buzzing with messages, some from friends offering support, others from clients concerned about the publicity, and a few from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. I ignored them all and went to my workshop, needing the familiar comfort of wood and tools and projects that made sense. Nate was waiting for me, his laptop open and his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where everything we thought we knew is wrong." He turned the laptop toward me, showing a screen full of financial records and legal documents. "I've been digging deeper into the Serena connection, trying to figure out how long she's been involved in this." "And?" "She's not just involved. She's the architect." He clicked through several documents, highlighting dates and amounts that painted a disturbing picture. "Look at this. The cabin rental agreement. It's in Serena's name, but it was paid for with money from a business account that traces back to a shell company she set up 6 months ago. So she's been planning this longer than we thought." "It's more than that. Look at the phone records." He pulled up another screen showing call logs and text messages. "The burner phone we found? It's not Isla's. It never was Isla's. It belongs to Serena, and she's been using it to coordinate with Liam from the beginning." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying Isla isn't having an affair?" "I'm saying the affair is real, but it's not what we thought it was." He clicked to another document, this one showing a series of financial transfers. "Serena's been embezzling money from the PTA accounts for over a year. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She needed a way to cover her tracks and a scapegoat to take the blame when the theft was discovered." "Isla?" "Isla. Think about it. Who has access to the PTA accounts as treasurer? Who would be the obvious suspect if money went missing, and who would be so devastated by a public scandal that she wouldn't be able to mount an effective defense?" I stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The affair with Liam isn't about love. It's about creating evidence of moral failure that would make Isla look guilty of financial crimes too. Exactly. Serena seduces Liam, convinces him to seduce Isla, then documents everything to create a narrative of a woman so morally compromised that embezzlement would be perfectly believable. But the financial records show transfers from our joint accounts to Liam's business. Transfers that Serena arranged, using account access she gained through her friendship with Isla. She's been playing a long game, setting up everyone involved to take the fall while she walks away clean. I sat down heavily in my work chair, my mind reeling with the scope of the deception. "How long have you known this?" "I started suspecting it yesterday, but I didn't have proof until an hour ago. I wanted to be sure before I told you." "Does Isla know?" "I don't think so. I think she believes she's having a genuine affair with Liam, that the financial arrangements are just her way of helping him out. She has no idea she's being set up." The workshop fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I thought about my wife, who I'd believed was betraying me with calculated cruelty, and realized that she was as much a victim as I was. "What about the divorce plans? The manufactured evidence against me?" "That's real, but I think it's Serena's insurance policy. If the embezzlement scheme falls apart, she needs Isla to be so distracted by a messy divorce that she won't have time to investigate the missing money. And the festival? The public humiliation? Nate's expression was grim. We just did Serena's work for her. Isla's reputation is destroyed, her marriage is over, and she's in no position to defend herself against whatever comes next. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a lead blanket. In my eagerness for revenge against a wife I thought had betrayed me, I'd played right into the hands of the real villain. Can we prove any of this? Some of it. The financial trail is solid, and I can trace the shell company back to Serena. But proving that she orchestrated the affair and manipulated Isla? That's going to be harder. What about Liam? Would he talk? Maybe, if he realizes he's been used as much as everyone else. Nate closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. What do you want to do? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the river that had been flowing past this spot for thousands of years, indifferent to human drama and deception. Somewhere in town, my wife was dealing with the aftermath of her public humiliation, probably still believing that her affair with Liam was real and that I was the monster who destroyed her life out of spite. And somewhere else, Serena Walsh was probably celebrating the success of a plan that had turned friends against each other and destroyed lives with surgical precision. I want to fix this, I said finally. All of it. That's going to be complicated. After today, Isla's not going to trust anything you say. Then we'll have to show her instead of telling her. I turned back to Nate, feeling the familiar focus that came when I had a clear project to work on. How long do you think we have before Serena makes her next move? Not long. With Isla's reputation destroyed and her marriage over, she's vulnerable. If I were Serena, I'd move fast to pin the embezzlement on her while she's still reeling from today. Then we'd better work fast too. I spent the next hour planning, using the same methodical approach that had made me successful in business and would hopefully make me successful in undoing the damage I'd caused. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was harder to repair than any piece of furniture I'd ever worked on. But I had to try, because somewhere in the wreckage of my marriage and my wife's reputation was the truth, and the truth was the only thing that could set any of us free. Finding Isla took 3 phone calls and a drive across town to the Riverside Motel, a place that had seen better decades and now catered to people whose lives had taken unexpected turns. Her Honda was parked outside room 12, looking as lost and out of place as I imagined she felt. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, rehearsing what I was going to say and trying to figure out how to explain that everything she thought she knew about the last 6 months was a lie. The October evening was cold enough to fog the windows, and the neon motel sign cast everything in shades of pink and blue that made the world look like a fever dream. Finally, I got out and knocked on her door. Go away, Wes. Her voice came through the thin wood, hollow with exhaustion and pain. We need to talk. We needed to talk 6 months ago. Now it's too late. It's about Serena. The silence that followed was long enough that I started to wonder if she was still listening. Then the door opened, revealing my wife in clothes she'd been wearing for 2 days and eyes that looked like she'd been crying for most of that time. What about Serena? Can I come in? She stepped aside reluctantly, and I entered a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. The furniture was old but clean, the kind of place that served its purpose without pretending to be anything more than a temporary refuge. You look terrible, I said, which wasn't the diplomatic opening I'd planned, but was undeniably true. Thanks. You look like someone who just destroyed his wife's life in front of half the town. She sat on the edge of the bed, her posture defensive, but her voice lacking the anger I'd expected. Isla, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Everything you think happened between us. Everything you think you know about Liam and the money and the affair, it's not what it seems. Don't. She held up a hand to stop me. Don't you dare try to gaslight me now. I know what I did. I know what I felt. You can't take that away from me just because you're angry. I pulled out Nate's laptop and set it on the small table between us. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I'm trying to give you the truth. For the next hour, I walked her through everything Nate had discovered. The shell company, the embezzled PTA funds, the carefully orchestrated timeline that had turned her into an unwitting accomplice in her own destruction. She listened in silence, her expression cycling through disbelief, understanding, and finally a rage that made my own anger look pale by comparison. She planned all of this? Isla's voice was barely above a whisper. Every detail, the affair, the financial transfers, even my discovery of the burner phone. She knew exactly how I'd react and what I'd do with the information. The phone calls I overheard? Probably real conversations between her and Liam, timed so you'd overhear them and think they were about you. She's been playing all of us like chess pieces. Isla stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where her life had been reduced to a single suitcase and a room that rented by the week. Why? Why would she do this to me? Money, primarily. She needed someone to blame for the missing PTA funds. But I think there's more to it than that. I showed her another screen, this one displaying social media posts and public records that painted a picture of Serena's increasingly desperate financial situation. Her husband left her with massive debts when he ran off with his secretary 2 years ago. She's been living on credit and borrowed time ever since. So she decided to destroy my marriage to cover her crimes? She decided to destroy your marriage, your reputation, and your ability to defend yourself. With you discredited and distracted by divorce proceedings, who would believe you if you claimed innocence when the embezzlement came to light? Isla was quiet for a long time, processing the scope of the betrayal. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but cold as winter steel. Where is she now? That's what we need to figure out. Nate's been monitoring her movements, but she's gotten careful since the festival. She knows the timeline has accelerated. What timeline? I showed her the final piece of evidence, a series of emails between Serena and Patricia Henley discussing an emergency PTA audit scheduled for Monday morning, 3 days away. She's going to blame you for the missing money, I said. With your reputation already destroyed and your marriage in ruins, you'll be the perfect scapegoat. By the time you're able to mount a defense, she'll have disappeared with whatever's left of the funds. Isla sat back down, her hands shaking slightly as the full implications sank in. How much money are we talking about? Close to $50,000 over the past year, enough to destroy your life even if you could prove your innocence, which would be difficult given how carefully she's constructed the evidence against you. And Liam? Another victim. She seduced him, convinced him that you were the one pursuing him, and used him to create the evidence she needed. He probably thinks he's in love with you. He is in love with me. The words came out small and sad. At least, I thought he was. I thought I was in love with him too. Maybe you were. Maybe what you felt was real, even if the circumstances that created it weren't. I closed the laptop and looked at my wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in months. The question is, what do we do about it? She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 20 years ago. Intelligent, strong, capable of facing difficult truths and making hard decisions. We stop her, she said simply. Together? Together. The plan we developed over the next 2 hours was simple in concept but complex in execution. We had to expose Serena's crimes while simultaneously proving Isla's innocence, all while working against a timeline that gave us less than 3 days to gather evidence and build a case. Nate joined us at the motel, bringing additional equipment and the kind of technical expertise that would be crucial for what we had planned. If Isla was surprised by my young apprentice's involvement in electronic surveillance, she didn't show it. Instead, she treated him like a co-conspirator in a war that had already cost too much. First priority is documenting the shell company and tracing the money trail, Nate explained, his laptop open and displaying financial records that looked like hieroglyphics to me but made perfect sense to him. If we can prove that Serena created false accounts and manipulated the transfers, we can establish a pattern of deliberate fraud. What about Liam? Isla asked. If he's been manipulated too, maybe he'll cooperate. That's risky, I said. If Serena finds out we've approached him, she might accelerate her timeline or disappear altogether. Then we don't approach him directly. We let him overhear something that makes him question what he's been told. It was a good plan, relying on the same techniques Serena had used against us, strategic information placed where the target would discover it naturally. We spent another hour working out the details, and by midnight we were ready to begin. The next morning, I drove to Bell's Outdoor Services, the failing landscaping business that had become the center of so much deception. Liam was in his office, a converted trailer that had seen better years, hunched over paperwork that probably represented bills he couldn't pay. We need to talk, I said, walking in without knocking. He looked up, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and finally a defiant anger that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. If you're here to threaten me, I'm here to offer you a choice. I sat down across from his desk, noting the stack of overdue notices and the calculator that showed numbers too small to cover his expenses. You can keep being Serena Walsh's puppet, or you can learn the truth about what she's been doing to all of us. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. The woman who introduced you to my wife, who convinced you that Isla was interested in you, who helped arrange your meetings and provided the money to keep your business afloat. The woman who's been pulling your strings like a master puppeteer. His expression shifted, confusion replacing anger. Serena didn't introduce us. Isla came to me directly about landscaping work. Did she? Or did Serena suggest that you bid on a job that just happened to put you in contact with an unhappy wife looking for attention? I watched the doubt creep into his eyes as he thought back to the beginning of his relationship with Isla. The timing, the circumstances, the convenient opportunities that had seemed like lucky breaks at the time. Even if that's true, it doesn't change what Isla and I have together. What you have together is real, I agreed. But it was built on a foundation of lies. Serena needed you to seduce my wife so she could document the affair and use it to destroy Isla's credibility. You were never the beneficiary of her plan. You were just another tool. I left him with copies of the financial records showing how Serena had manipulated the money transfers, making it look like Isla was stealing from joint accounts to support him, when in reality Serena was stealing from the PTA to support her own desperate finances. Think about it, I said as I left. When this all comes out, and it will come out, do you want to be remembered as another victim or as an accomplice? The rest of the day was spent in preparation for the final confrontation. Nate worked his electronic magic, gathering evidence and building an airtight case against Serena. Isla contacted friends and neighbors, quietly rebuilding the relationships that had been damaged by the festival revelation. And I prepared for a conversation that would determine whether my marriage could be salvaged from the wreckage of the past 6 months. Sunday evening found us back at the motel, reviewing our evidence and finalizing our strategy. Tomorrow would bring the PTA audit, Serena's attempt to pin her crimes on Isla, and our chance to turn the tables on someone who had played us all with masterful skill. Are you ready for this? I asked Isla as we prepared to leave. She looked at me with eyes that held pain and hope in equal measure. Are we ready for this? Whatever happens tomorrow, we're going to have to deal with the aftermath together. Together, I agreed, and for the first time in months, the word felt like a promise instead of a burden. The reckoning was coming, and this time we would be ready for it.